We do not receive funding from the town of West Hartford's budget, and our mission is to privately raise and offer financial support to enhance the library's resources and services for the benefits of all members of our community. Because of the generosity of our funders, the Library Foundation has been able to host national and world-renowned authors for over 30 years, including Wally Lamb, Richard Rousseau, Anna Quinlan, Billy Collins, and of course, our special guest tonight. If you're so inclined, you will find in your program how you can donate to the West Hartford Public Library Foundation so that we can continue to bring exciting programs like tonight's to West Hartford. I'd also like to thank our program sponsor, Freed Marcroft, for their generous support of tonight's event. Freed Marcroft is a family law firm who helps their clients discover and in many cases rewrite their own stories so that they can live an inspired, full life. The firm's owners, Megan Freed and Kristen Marcroft, friends of mine, and Megan is here with us tonight. Thank you, Megan. Along with their entire team, work tirelessly to pave new paths for each client. Everyone they work with has an opportunity to move forward with intention into a new way of living, rooted in his or her own goals. We could also not hold tonight's event if it weren't for the help of our wonderful town staff. We thank the West Hartford Public Schools and Duffy Schools, West Hartford Facilities, West Hartford Public Works, and of course our dear friends with the West Hartford Police Department. So, to introduce tonight's guest speaker, it is now my distinguished pleasure to introduce our library director and also someone who also happens to be one of my all-time favorite middle school English teachers, West Hartford's very own Martha Church. Thank you.
So that just tells you how old I am. Thank you all for joining us tonight for what is our annual celebration of a well-known author. We do this every year, and your participation in this event is what makes it so very, very special. So I want to really thank you all for being here. Chuck took a lot of my thank yous, but I have a few more to add. We had members of the state library community who helped run discussions for us over the course of the summer. And those are Kate Byrode, who's here tonight, Sunny Scarpa, Tina Panic, Bridget Quinn Carey, Michelle Penn, and Cindy Hyken. I also want to thank West Hartford's plant and facility staff, and especially the principal and staff of Duffy School, for helping us find the largest available venue for tonight, which is this building right here. And I want to thank our very talented jazz pianist, Tayeno Pacheco, who came to us all the way from New Jersey. Since last spring, I guess I should hold this. Since last spring, we have been focused on an author whose work has been translated into over 30 languages and has appeared in various publications, including The New Yorker, Granta, the O. Henry Prize Stories, the Financial Times, and Zoetrope. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is the author of 3 novels, Purple Hibiscus, which won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize and the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, Half of a Yellow Sun, which won the Orange Prize and was a National Book Critics Circle Award finalist, and a New York Times notable book, and Americana, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award and was named one of the New York Times top 10 best books of 2013. Ms. Adichie is also the author of the story collection, The Thing Around Your Neck. Her 2009 TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, is now one of the most viewed TED Talks of all time. Her 2012 talk, We Should All Be Feminists, has started a worldwide conversation about feminism and was published as a book in 2014. Her most recent book, Dear Ejwele, or A Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions, was published in 2017. A recipient of a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship, Ms. Adichie divides her time between the United States and Nigeria. Tonight, Ms. Adichie will be joined in conversation by poet, creative writer, and associate professor of English at the University of Hartford, Dr. Joyce Ashuntangtang. Following that, there will be a few minutes for questions from the audience, and we'd like to have you form a line and come to this microphone if you're somebody that has a question. And then we will be doing the book signing over on this side of the room. Again, the line should form over there. And now it is my pleasure to officially welcome our mayor, Sherry Cantor, who will be reading a proclamation and welcoming tonight's guest officially to the town of West Hartford. Sherry.
Thank you, Martha. It is such a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I'm so proud of all the library does. Martha and her staff made this happen, but obviously it's been a real community effort. So I want to, again, thank all the people that made this possible. Appreciate it. Please give your hands for the West Hartford Library and the Friends of West Hartford Library. Whereas the town of West Hartford is home to readers of all ages, representing a wide variety of backgrounds and interests. And whereas for 30 years, the West Hartford Public Library has been inviting community members to celebrate the joys of storytelling, great writing, and reading by hosting an annual author event. And whereas these special events, now known collectively as West Hartford READS, have been made possible by support from the community through contributions to the West Hartford Library Foundation. And whereas for the past several months, local literature lovers have been reading and discussing the novels, essays, and short stories of prize-winning author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And whereas Ms. Adichie has, through the gift of storytelling, enabled countless readers to travel beyond the boundaries of our own lives and to walk in the footsteps of others, thus expanding our minds and enlarging our hearts. Now therefore be it proclaimed that on behalf of the Town Council and the residents of West Hartford, and I'm sure all of you guests here, I, Mayor Sherry G. Cantor, do hereby recognize and welcome Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie back to Connecticut as our 2019 West Hartford READS author.
happens for every author. So, we're just going to start. First of all, welcome. I'm so excited to see you. I don't get. Oh. You can hear me now. Yes. See, I always think my teacher voice is good enough. Well, I was saying how excited I am. I never get enough of being a fan myself. So welcome.
Thank you.
And we're just going to start right away. And the good old Cameroonian African that I am, I'm going to do what we Cameroonians like to do. We claim relatives that are successful. So my first question to you is, looking at your profile, Connecticut shows up quite prominently. You graduated from Eastern, you went to Yale, you have family here, I could recognize them over there. So what is your relationship to Connecticut? Is this another home?
Not quite, no. I thought it would be good to start on a note of honesty. But well, first, I really want to say thank you all for coming out. It's just really lovely it's just lovely when people come. So thank you. And it's really nice to be back in Connecticut. Thank you to everyone involved with West Hartford READS. It's just, I really appreciate the invitation, the hospitality, the kindness. And Connecticut is not, I wouldn't quite say home, as much as I think Joyce wants me to say it's home. But I will say that Connecticut has been very important in shaping who I am today. I graduated from Eastern Connecticut State, and then I came back years later to go to Yale. But really, I think it was my early years here that contributed to forming me. Connecticut was my first introduction to the joys and perils of winter. And I think that it's also, Connecticut, I think, is responsible for my first novel because I was so homesick and so cold that I started writing Purple Hibiscus. So, and yes, I have family here, so it's a state that's close to my heart because of that, because people I love live here. My sister is there. Not only is she the most beautiful woman in the world, I think she's the best family physician ever. I think her patient schedule is full, but if you're looking, she's right around Yukon. And my brother-in-law also lives here, and somebody I absolutely adore, my nephew, Tokes, lives here as well. And he hates me to say this, but he has inspired quite a few characters in my fiction. So this is all to say that I owe Connecticut a lot in my writing career.
In fact, now that she says that, I would share a little story. It's amazing how life plays out. I used to teach at Yukon, and I lived in stores. And guess who was my primary care physician? And at that time, she had just published Purple Hibiscus. I think I went in one day and I was telling her that I teach literature. I was an assistant professor in residence at the time. And I'm sure she must have told me that, oh, my younger sister writes literature. And when I found out who that younger sister was, I started ranting and talking. And she was like, wow, you guys really hold her in high esteem. That's my younger sister. And every time I came to her office, it was the same thing. And guess what? My children were under the care of her husband, who was a pediatrician. But guess what? What I'll confess here to her is that it took a lot of discipline not to beg to want to see her younger sister. And she can testify that for 5 years, I never asked to join the dinner or come to visit. I'm like, I know she expects that this African will do that, and I'm like, this African knows better. So I never did, and I haven't seen her since I left Yukon for University of Hartford. It's been 10 years. Good to see her today. So now that we talk about home, and you don't claim Connecticut as home, but it definitely has a place of importance. Where is home? And what does home mean to you?
Home, it's interesting because I think that as I get older, I find myself recalibrating the meaning of home. Home, I think of myself as a person who now has 2 homes. Nigeria is home, and the US has become home. Because I spend half my time here and I spend half my time in Nigeria. But, increasingly, I also think that home has become a state of mind. I think for me, home is really anywhere that I don't question myself and my belonging. And sometimes it's Nigeria, sometimes it's not, in that sense. But in a more, I guess, sort of just more plain-spoken way, it's Nigeria and the US. I have a Nigerian passport. So.
Still?
Yes, by choice.
For how long?
I do. I think it's also partly because mean, I write mostly about Nigeria, and my sensibility is still Nigerian. So it doesn't matter what my home becomes in the future. My sensibility and my sense of self was formed in Nigeria. And I think because of that, there's a part of me that wants to go through the humiliations of having a Nigerian passport, because that way I can prove my Nigerian authenticity. And you don't want me to get started on what it means to travel on a Nigerian passport.
I was almost going to ask that. But why would you want to do that? You don't want to go quickly? You know, the American passport says you must allow this person to go without delay.
Yes.
It's a blue passport.
Except for when you're in the Middle East.
Oh, now I don't want that one in the Middle East.
The only time I was happy not to have the Nigerian passport was when I went to Qatar, and I saw that people who had American passports were in the longer line. So I was like, yes, finally.
Well, we're going to move right along. I watched a video some time ago, and somebody was trying to ask you a question on race, quoting one of your lines. And what you said was interesting to me. You said, I come up with fairly good lines, and then I don't know what to do with them. Yeah, and when you said that, in explaining further, you said some good lines, which I want to ask you about now. And this is what you said. Race is the major organizing principle of American history and American life, and the one Americans are mostly uncomfortable about. I thought that's a quotable quote. Now I want you to speak to it.
If you said I said that, I'm going to have to believe you, because I don't really have the evidence that I said that. But it sounds really good, so I'll claim it anyway. What did I mean? If I did say that, what I meant was... But really, no, I think so. I think that race is America's original sin. Race is America's really founding atrocity. And I think it remains the thing that Americans are most uncomfortable talking about. When I came to the US, I like to say that I was not black, I became black in America. You know, I grew up in Nigeria, I left Nigeria when I was 19, and I came to the US and took on this new identity of black, because in Nigeria, skin color is just not an identity marker. You know, ethnicity and religion are. So in Nigeria, we have many, many problems, but racism is not one of them. There's tribalism, there's religious issues, there's class, but the idea that you belong to a race called black, and not just that, but that it meant something, was a discovery for me when I came to the US. And initially, it was something I resisted. So I went through a period of saying, don't call me black, I'm Nigerian. Because I had very quickly internalized all the negative stereotypes about blackness in America, and I didn't want to associate with it. And obviously now looking back, I realized that all of that came from, you know, a misguided ignorance, you know, and stupidity, really. You know, I think we all deserve our moments of stupidity in our lives. And so I think that was mine when I was sort of, you know, shying away from blackness. Obviously now I no longer do. I very much identify as black. But I think that it's still something in this country that is very contested. People are uncomfortable about it, and there's kind of a dishonesty around it. And so people talk, it's interesting to me to watch how race is spoken about in code in this country. And I think my novel Americana it is about that. When people say things like, oh, somebody came in for an interview, but he wasn't a good cultural fit. Actually, they're talking about race. You know, when people talk about, when politicians talk about law and order, it's really code, it's about race. And it's something that I think it's taken me living here all of these years to understand. And then looking at American history, that there's so much about this country that you can only understand when you look at it through the lens of race. I remember driving through Philadelphia, which was the first city I lived in when I came here, and thinking, why are certain parts of the city just full of black people? And why are those the really bad parts of the city? Only now that I know the history of this country do I realize that it's not an accident, right? It's the result of state actions that restricted where African Americans could live. And even things like the Electoral College that I think some of us might not be enthusiastic about these days, also has its roots in race and racism. For me, I think one of the things that, and again, part of the reason I wrote Americana was because it's something I've been thinking about a lot, that for progress to be made, we need to have honesty in those conversations. And the kind of honesty that means that we have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And if there's anything I've learned about America is that people do not like to be uncomfortable. It's and it's not such a bad thing to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Hearing you talk about this, I'm almost tempted to ask that if you were if you decided to produce another manual, maybe this time is to Joyce, on how to raise her boys in this environment. Where would that go?
I don't know. So you have sons?
I have sons, 2 boys.
How old are they?
They're now all 19. Thank God. They made it to 19 and 24.
I think you've done your job.
That's what I think. Being a parent in the United States these days.
Yes. I think it must be really tough to raise a black boy in this country. I can't even begin to imagine what it must be like, because I really do think that this is a country that imposes on black boys a very unfair burden of stereotypes, where it just seems to me that black boys are not allowed to just be boys. I remember a story once that I was told by a young black man who said that it was late and he was out in a parking lot and there were 2 young women who seemed to have trouble with their car, and he was with his mother, and his mother said, "Oh, go help them." And he's like, "No, Mom, I'm not going to help them. I'm a black man. I can't." Right? Because I don't know what they're going to think if I sort of walk towards them to help them. And there was something about that made me so sad, because I thought, my God, this is what you live with, that in some ways your ability to show kindness is that there's an obstacle to that, and that obstacle is simply that you happen to be born a black male in the world. I think if I had to, and so because I don't have a son, I'm always, before I have a 4-year-old daughter, and before I had my daughter, I was very quick to give advice about raising children. I mean, before you finished asking me, I was like, this is what you should do. Now that I'm living with the reality of a 4-year-old, I'm not giving any advice. And all I can say is, for all the parents out there, well done. I don't know how the hell you all survived. But really, I think just the reality of it is that it's easy to be prescriptive and say, this is what you should do, right? But the reality of things is always harder. I wrote about raising a child who's a girl. I think if I'd written about a boy, obviously there are many things I don't know, but one thing I think I would say is that we need to give boys the language to be vulnerable, the language of emotion. I think it's one thing we don't let boys have in the world, and I think it's very bad for boys, because those boys grow up to be men who then are unable to communicate, are unable to express emotion, and we judge them for that. But we don't ask how that happened. Right? Now that I have a 4-year-old daughter, when I take her out to play, I'm always watching other parents. Well, I do this because I'm a fiction writer, so I don't mind my business. So I'm constantly, I'm eavesdropping on other people's conversations, watching people. This is what you have to do to collect material for fiction. So in my eavesdropping and watching people and not minding my business, I'm struck by how even now, in the progressive area of Maryland where we live, parents still deal with their children differently based on whether it's a boy or a girl. The boy falls down, and the mother isn't running to pick him up and give him hugs and kisses. She's saying to him, be tough, be strong. The girl falls down, she's just enveloped in hugs and kisses, but at the same time, the boy gets a lot more room to be a boy. So he breaks things, and the parents sort of shrug because he's a boy. And there's a wonderful line from a novel I read sometime by Meg Wolitzer, and one of the characters says that she had assumed that boys could not be saved, and so there was no point in trying. And for me, I think many of us in the world, unconsciously internalize that idea that there is no point. Boys will be wild and crazy, so why bother? Which I think is also sad, because what I would do is give that poor kid the hugs and kisses that the girl gets, but also give the girl the room that the boy gets to be whatever. And I think maybe also what I would say is, do not ever praise boys for doing any kind of domestic work. Joyce is laughing because I think she's guilty of this. Boys make their beds and their mothers go, "Oh, that's so good. Why? He should bloody well make his bed."
It starts by praising the dad.
Oh, good Lord, don't get me started on that. The father changes the diapers and we're so happy. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's your child, No, but really, I think it's something, and women internalize it. Because again, we've been socialized to think that because we are women, we are the caregivers. And somehow, when a man then does what he should do, we give him excessive praise. So when that little boy is growing up, he makes his bed, his mother is so proud. He's going to get in a relationship, and he's going to expect praise from his girlfriend or his wife, who, if she has any sense, will look at him like, what? Right? So,
you just said that you don't want to be prescriptive, and but you can help yourself there.
No, I can't. I guess I can't.
And in fact, that's my next question, because sometimes reading your fiction and reading your nonfiction, it looks like I'm suffering from having a split personality here, because this person here in the fiction is not conclusive. You leave room for the reader to fill in the blanks. You're ambivalent here. When it comes to your nonfiction, you're bold, you're direct. We should all be feminists. You have suggestions in 15 suggestions. So, and I'm thinking, what's going on here? In one place, she's like, I'll leave it to you to figure out what happened at the end. This one, I'm going to tell you the A to Z. So could you speak to that? She's guilty as charged.
I am. And it takes a very careful reader to. I think you've read me really well. And I think a writer, there's no greater compliment than to be read carefully, really, for a writer. So thank you, Joyce. Okay, I think I need to defend myself. But you know what? I'm going to say that I really don't make any apologies for being prescriptive when it comes to gender. I feel so strongly about how important it is that men and women be treated as equal human beings in the world, that if it means my being prescriptive to try and just make a tiny change, I will be. But fiction, I think in a sense, I do feel like two different people. The person who writes fiction is not the person who writes nonfiction. When I'm writing fiction, and fiction is my first love, fiction is the love of my life. It's the thing that gives me meaning. It's what makes me really happy when it's going well. And when I'm writing fiction, it's like a beautiful madness. I feel transported. I feel as though the spirits are speaking to me. So characters come alive, and it's just really magical.
You go Pentecostal.
said like a good African. Yes, I do. I do go Pentecostal, except that I don't quite speak in tongues, except through my characters. But actually, I think that would be a good way to put it. I do. It's kind of being yes, it's being Pentecostal. But when I'm writing nonfiction, it's so different. When I'm writing fiction, I'm telling a story. I'm in this universe. It's an imaginative world. I don't know who I'm writing for. So when I'm writing fiction, I'm not thinking about my audience. I'm thinking about just being in this magical world of being transported to another place. When I'm writing nonfiction, I'm very clear about what I'm doing. I know who I imagine my audience is. I know what I'm trying to achieve. And because I think there's a part of me that is part Messiah and part stern headmistress, I'm sort of, I think it doesn't take me very much to then start saying, here's what you need to do to fix the world. So I think that's why a lot of my nonfiction is really different. And it's also that I'm in a very different emotional place when I'm writing nonfiction. Quite different from fiction. Really, it's just like being two different people.
Now that we're talking about fiction, I'll tell you something that happened in 2012 at the African Literature Association conference in Dallas. This was a conference that had to do with human rights in African literature, and I was on a panel that dealt with women's rights. And I remember my paper was on purple hibiscus and some other works by African women. And we had all this, there was another paper there on Lola Shonane's The Secret Lives of Baba Segi's Wives. And at the end, of course, for those of you who've read Purple Hibiscus, the father dies at the end,
Oops.
And this literary critic, this woman, I want to stand up because of the way she said it. She was not very happy. And she said, I want to talk to you African women who write novels. Stop killing the men. Stop killing the men. It's becoming too much. I know what you are trying to say to improve our lives, but you should stop killing the men. If you were in that audience, how would you react?
You mean apart from an eye roll? Well, first of all, I think it just sounds to me like melodrama that has no substance. Because really, when you think about it, how many books? So she's saying African women writers are killing the men. In how many books has this happened? Just on a serious note. And I also worry that this is the kind of thing that makes me uncomfortable about the conversation when we're talking about feminism, how quick people are to try and deflect. So I imagine that she probably would get rousing applause from other Africans, both men and women, right? I'm sure that's what happened.
Let me see what happened. The men were happy, they clapped. Some of us were bad women, we were not happy with the comment. And others clapped that, no, they're going too far. Why did she kill him? Why? Especially in that manner. So they were upset.
And is anybody, wait, me or Lola?
Both.
Oh. Now, but did anybody talk about, I think that if we cannot read literature as prescribing how we should live our lives, right? But even if we were to do that, do we start at the end of the story? We don't. We start at the beginning of the story. And I'm always worried about stories that start at the end or halfway. So, oh, don't kill him, and how did you kill him? But let's go back. What did he do? Right? What happened? It's the same way that even the law in countries all over the world recognize that all killing is not equal. Right? That's why you have different degrees of murder. That's why you have manslaughter. So that kind of comment, for me, and it's not even a literary judgment, it's just it's a melodramatic thing that you just do to get very cheap applause. I don't find it to have any merit. And I think there are other things to talk about. There's an epidemic of male violence against women in the world. We're not talking about books and novels. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what we're doing about that. And actually, if this woman at the African Literature Conference is talking about that, I also want her to talk about the Nigerian men in this country who are murdering their wives. And they're murdering their wives because they're upset that their wives make more money than they do. Let's talk about that. That's what I want to talk about.
Definitely, and but this sort of, I want to think that you're familiar with this sort of pushback from the inside, from people that you think would understand, from people who've seen their mothers battered to their graves, that they could say, finally, one fights back. So what do you do with this kind of pushback from the inside?
It's the most demoralizing. And also in some ways confusing. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I can intellectualize it. I can tell you it's because women who are anti-feminist, that it's a very difficult thing to have to confront the true extent of your own lack of power. Right? That it's a difficult thing. So instead you push it away and say, well, nothing's wrong, everything's fine. But emotionally, it's just hard for me to, to grasp. I expect pushback from certain quarters. So when that comes, you shrug and you go with it. But when it comes from people you think, you're thinking, well, this actually is good for us. It's very strange. But again, I think it makes the case for why we need feminism. Women in general are socialized to participate in their own oppression. And often they don't know it. It's part of our socialization.
I need an applause on that.
It's true though. When you think about it and think about how different cultures, and this thing cuts across cultures, how we raise women to take pride in things that are bad for them. And so in the end, we become complicit in our own oppression. It's the reason, for example, that, so I can talk about Igbo culture in Nigeria, where the ability to cook, for example. It's the same way that even the moral thing. So a woman who cannot cook is a bad person. Like, it's a moral judgment on you. But why are you taught to cook? So that you can cater to a man. But at the same time, you then turn around, other women will judge other women for not doing that. And when you step back and think, who's benefiting from the larger system? It's not you, woman. It's not. But you're sort of, it's not you. I'm sure that many of you have read Margaret Atwood. It's really so apt that women become handmaidens in their own oppression, and there's a sadness there. So when I talk to young women, I tell them that feminism is about unlearning so many of the things that we've learned as part of our socialization. I'm still unlearning many things. That's what feminism is for me.
That's insightful. Now, switching subjects or switching novels, we're going to have half of a yellow sun, which you've said in at different times that it holds a special place. And I'm thinking, you spent so much time to write that book. Did it fulfill your own expectations?
Yep.
As the good old African teacher would say, discuss.
Oh my goodness, that's reminding me of my secondary school exams. The teacher would write a very long thing, half of which you don't understand, and then at the end, discuss. So you then write something long and equally incomprehensible as the response. So I shall now give you an incomprehensible response, the reason I kind of laughed is, in some ways, it's that kind of question, well, do you think your book is as good as you thought it would be? And I think I'm supposed to perform false modesty and say, well, but actually I'm so damn proud that I wrote that book. it's the thing that I'm proudest of having done. But it also took so much from me emotionally, mentally. So Half of a Yellow Sun is set during the Nigerian Biafra War in the 1960s, and my parents lived through the war. I wasn't born at the time, but it's a war that I grew up knowing that its shadow, that I grew up in the shadow of the war. And both my grandfathers died in the war. And even as a child, I remember just being haunted and wanting to understand this thing that took my grandfathers. And I felt as though this novel was a novel that, at the risk of sounding, necessarily dramatic, that my ancestors wanted me to write. And so I read everything I could find. I did so much research, and it took me years to write. I had moments of just intense self-doubt. I would often stop to cry, because then there were pictures from a woman I met, actually here in the US, gave me some pictures that she had taken in Biafra, because she was part of the, I think it was Caritas, one of the NGOs that went to Biafra. And she had these pictures of children just utterly ravaged by kwashiorkor and very close to death, very thin, their hair red, their bellies like balloons, their bodies like toothpicks. And, I had seen these pictures in books and in the archives and libraries, but this woman gave me the pictures that she actually took, and there was something about those particular ones. I would look at those pictures and just cry. And then I would think, this could very well be my relative. My grandfather died in a refugee camp, my maternal grandfather. And so that whole process was just really difficult. I remember when I finally finished the novel, I remember thinking, for so long I would think, I can't wait to finish, because then my life can continue. But then when I finished the novel, I sank into the worst depression that I'd ever had, because I suddenly didn't know what to do with myself. It was such a strange time. And, but then, I was happy that the book, that it meant something to people, because I knew that for many Nigerians, it would be not just literature, it would also be history. Because we don't really learn about Biafra in school. In the way that I think every country hides parts of its past that it's ashamed of, Nigeria hides Biafra. And so I knew that many people in my generation didn't even know anything about Biafra, and that this book would be for them history. And when it kind of started to reach people, it made me happy. It made me really happy. But I don't think I can undertake another project like Biafra again.
After that book, now that you say that you went into a space, because I'm thinking you did so much history and you read so much, you took like 4 years for that book, and then after that you went to school to study history. You didn't have enough?
No.
So what was that all about? Did that, because it ignited an interest, or did you notice a gap? What?
I think it's that I noticed a gap. I've always been interested in history. Because I think it's impossible for us to know where we're going if we don't know where we've been. And so I've always been a person who looks back, because I want to understand how we got here. And I think when you grew up in Nigeria, and I'm sure it's true for Cameroon, I think it's true for really the continent of Africa, we don't really engage with our history, especially the history that we had before colonialism. And I think when I started reading about Biafra, I started to think, I'm reading about 1950s, 1960s, a bit of 1940s, but suddenly I thought, I'm very curious about what Igbo land was like in 1850, and I don't know. I cannot conceptualize the life of my great-great-grandfather. And for me, there's something about it that was sad. So that's why I decided to go and study African history.
And I believe you when you said that world, when you were preparing for this novel, and because after that, you went with a total abandon in Americana. You're like, I'm out of this zone. The world, here I come.
Yes.
And I see there's a quote here from Laura Pearson. Chicago Tribune, June 23rd, 2013. And this is what she says. Sprawling, ambitious, and gorgeously written, Americana covers race, identity, relationships, community, politics, privilege, language, hair, ethnocentrism, migration, intimacy, estrangement, blogging, books, and Barack Obama. It covers 3 continents, spans decades, leaps gracefully from chapter to chapter to different cities and other lives. Adichie weaves them assuredly into a thoughtfully structured epic. The result is a timeless love story steeped in our times. And I'm thinking this rich diversity and tapestry holds true for all your fictional works. So I'm looking at this, I'm like, so where does she usually begin? With character, with location, with politics, with Barack Obama? Where does she begin?
Yes, with Barack Obama. I mean, if there's any young writer out there, that's a good place to start. You're right, with Barack Obama. You can just, you can write a sort of a deeply mournful elegy about missing a reasonable president. Okay, moving on. My brother worries that I speak my mind too much.
I've been trying to stay high.
All right. I won't do any political rants, not today. I care too much about West Hartford. But, I don't read reviews, so hearing that, I thought, not bad. Not bad.
So for those who have not read Americana, you want to give us a little synopsis?
Americana is, and Joyce is right, that after Half of a Yellow Sun, which was deeply emotional and very personal, and just hard in many ways, Americana was different. Americana was fun. While I cried often while writing Half of a Yellow Sun, I laughed often while writing Americana. And I then started to worry that I was laughing too much at my own jokes. Because I feel like there's something wrong with that, If you're amused by yourself a bit too much, then it's just doesn't feel very kosher. But I don't know, Americana is about love, and it's all of those things. I wanted to write a book about an African immigrant, which I wanted to write an African immigrant story that is familiar to me. And by that I mean, when I came to the US, I very quickly realized that the African immigrant story that people were generally familiar with was sort of the story of the African immigrant who's running away from terrible poverty, war, AIDS, that kind of thing, just catastrophe. And I think that story is very important. It's the story of many, many Africans, but it's not my story. And I remember being struck by how often I was expected to be familiar with it when I wasn't. And so I wanted to write the kind of story that is mine and that is familiar to me. The story of people who leave their countries in Africa, not because their villages have been burnt down or because they can't afford to eat, but because they have dreams and they want more. And I think this has been the story really of human beings throughout our time on Earth, that the history of humanity is a history of migration. And often it's not just about wanting better land, more arable land, or it's sometimes also just about dreams and hopes and thinking that there is more over there. And so I wanted to write that, and that's what Americana is. But I also wanted to write about what it means to be a Black person in America who's not an African American, and what it means to discover race and ultimately to embrace that identity while also challenging the negative stereotypes around that identity. So that's what happens to the main character, Ifemelo, when she comes to the US and she starts writing a blog. And that blog was something I had so much fun with. That's actually the thing that made me laugh. And then I would stop and be like, wait, is this healthy? And then also it's a love story because I love love, because I'm deep inside just a hopeless love romantic. I think we all need food and we all need love. So it's a love story as well, and I grew up reading a lot of romance books. Yes, many of them terrible. And I think there's a part of me that always quarreled with the premise of those books. I don't know how many people here know the Mills and Boone series, which so I feel as though every young African read Mills and Boone. Did you? Yes. And I think even then, there was something about them that just didn't feel quite right to me, because the woman never had any agency, and she always pretended. So she liked him, but she had to be, he would then pull her to him and then she would melt. But I would think, where is her own agency, right? So it was always sort of, she was an object, she wasn't a subject. She didn't do, things were done to her and about her. And I think there was a part of me that wanted to rewrite that. And so in Americana, it's a love story. It's, I think it's sort of ridiculously, gushingly love. But at the same time, she's not stupid, right? This is the thing. I mean, it's that thing where the woman is a full human being. She's flawed, and she wants. She's not just wanted and doesn't have to be persuaded. And, it's that thing. Actually, I remember one particular Mills and Boone that annoyed me, really. Because, so she likes him, and he clearly likes her. But the thing that happens with Mills and Boone is until, if it's a novel that's about 110 pages, until page 105, they hate each other. And then, and there were parts where I would think, well, come on. I mean, you really? And I was maybe 15, and I would think, even I am more mature than you are. I mean, why can't you have a conversation? What the hell is going on? So it's a love story, Americana, but I think it's a love story that wants to challenge the narrative of a love story as something in which a woman doesn't have agency.
I could see that, and I did a bit of Mills and Bones, but I think my generation, which I think is a little bit ahead of yours, a little bit, without giving away too much. We read the same thing, Beta M. Clay, A Woman's Temptation.
Yes, I read that.
Was it Basket of Flowers? Women just suffer and suffer and suffer. So thank you for writing the anti-Mills and Bones story. But as you're talking there, I was thinking of the way you build your characters. You make them, they're complex. Even when they are flawed, there's some desirability. We can get a bad character, an absolute bad character. And I'm thinking, you say when you write your fiction, it's total abandon, you let the fiction drive you, but I'm looking at it and say, hell freaking no, she's making this deliberate. You talk to them.
I have to say, Joyce is the ideal reader. Where she's saying to you, nope, that's not what you said you're doing, is not what you're doing.
So I'm suspicious here.
And you know what? I think I hear you. I think your suspicion is well received. But honestly, I don't think I can answer that honestly, because a lot of the questions about my process and my thinking are things I make them up as I go along. I do events like this and I have to invent answers to questions, because the truth is that when I'm sitting there in front of my laptop, I'm not really thinking about why I'm making the choices I'm making. There's a lot that's intuitive. And I think afterwards, maybe I can look back and think, I don't know. What I will say though is that I think as a writer, your worldview comes across in your fiction. And I think that my worldview is one in which I think it's really difficult to find a person who is entirely bad. It's not that they don't exist, I just think that not many of them exist. And I think that human beings are complicated and flawed, and I'm very resistant to simple answers. Right? I'm very resistant to the idea of someone is just bad or someone is just really good. So it's how human beings are textured that interests me, and I think that comes across in my fiction. And also, in general, I believe that people can do better. I think I think I have a generally optimistic view of humanity. Mostly. Present political situations have stretched that, but I do think that human beings, I think that as human beings that we can do and be better, and maybe that comes across in my fiction as well, I guess.
As you talked about your own value system also coming in, I'm thinking of your TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, and where you talk about Fide, the houseboy, and how you only saw him as being poor until you visited the family. And I'm thinking, it looks as if after that she learned her lesson. Every minor character in your fiction is important some kind of way. So it's like, you don't have minor characters. It may be minor in terms of the role they play, the number of times they show up, but they're not minors.
Yeah, I learned my lesson, you're right. Actually, that makes me very happy to hear that. I hadn't thought about it, but if that is true, I like to hear that because it means that, again, my worldview has come into my fiction. I really believe that everyone has a story. And I like people. I mean, I think that there are writers who start off with ideas and writers who start off by observing the world. I'm in the latter category. So I'm interested in people, in people's stories. I'm sort of, I'm a person who, at the airport, I'm watching people, I'm imagining, what's your story? I get very tearful when I see complete strangers hugging goodbye. Right? It's not my business, I don't know who the hell they are, but sometimes I tear up. I'm like, oh my God, he's leaving, And then I'm imagining what their story is, when are they going to see each other again, or what just kills me is when it's children, right? When the little kid is waving goodbye, I'm just like, oh my Lord. So I think it's that idea of that, everyone has a story. And I also have started thinking about, sort of, what if we had this series where we somehow know everybody's sort of backstory? And here's what I mean. While I like people, I also have moments of misanthropy where I cannot stand human beings. And this is the thing about being complex, right? But so there are times when I'm irritated by a person, and then sometimes I say to myself, well, what if I knew the backstory? Right, so someone is very rude, for example, and I get really annoyed. But then I think, what if that person got really bad news that someone they love has cancer? What if they got that bad news this morning and they're just really dealing with it, and so then they end up being nasty to you? How will that change how I feel about them, I try to do this as a way of handling my own irritation. It doesn't always work, but again, I think maybe that's also what comes across in my fiction, that I just think everybody has a story. Everybody has a story.
I think so too. In fact, just so you know, that TED Talk has been on my syllabus for 10 years. Every semester. It's a must. And, one of the things that it seems you've realized, and you're using it effectively, I think, is that you have a megaphone, and your voice can reach places. And so you take out, you write an editorial on homosexuality, and somebody would say, why is she getting into that? And then recently, I was pleasantly surprised. You wrote about the crisis in my own country, and you don't know how we shared and reshared on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all that. And I'm thinking, how does she decide what she gets involved in? Is somebody telling her, or does she say, this one is worth my time, I'm going to write about it?
No, nobody tells me what to do. It's just, I've just never been a person who gets told what to do. I think you can ask my big sister, I think she would corroborate that. And this is for good and ill. It's not always a good thing. But, and you're right, I think becoming this my fiction gave me a platform. It's my novels that give me a platform. And even the TED Talk happened because I wrote this novel, and somebody who organized the TED Talk was a fan of the novel and wanted me to come speak. And I remember being terrified because they said they never ask writers. and then I had no idea what the hell I was going to talk about. But more recently, it's really just what moves me. So with writing about Cameroon, my mother was born in Cameroon.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and you know what's happening in the Anglophone region has just always infuriated me in the way that there's so much happening across the continent of Africa that is just infuriating. And then of course we have a dear friend who I wrote about in the piece, and just watching him calling family on WhatsApp, and then when there was the blackout, I don't know, I was so moved by it, and I thought if there's one thing I can do, it's just to raise awareness, and so I chose to do it. With homosexuality in Nigeria, I just think it's immoral. I think it's an immoral thing that homosexuality is a crime. I just think it's immoral. And the idea that the citizens of Nigeria who have done nothing wrong, simply by existing in the world, they can be arrested, imprisoned, harassed. So I wrote that because what I was trying to do was to try and get people to think a bit differently. Nigeria obviously is not the only country where across Africa, the Middle East, parts of Asia, where it's a crime. But to start to think about people as human beings, because I think religion is part of the reason that we're blinded. So people will say things like, the Bible says that it's a sin, therefore they should die. To which I say, well, the Bible says many other things are sins, and many of them you commit. Do you think you should die? But even more importantly, to think about it in terms of citizenship, right? I understand that this is your religion, and I respect it, and you can put it aside, because right now we're talking about citizenship. Do you think a citizen should be harassed, assaulted, thrown in prison for doing nothing wrong? And, I got a lot of pushback because of that. I remember this woman saying to me that she had a boss who had pictures of inspiring women on the office wall, and that after I wrote that piece talking about homosexuality being, that we shouldn't make it a crime, she said her boss came into the office and said, "Take Chimamanda's picture down, she supports gays." And when she told me this, I said, I really take that as a compliment. In general, and this is something I would say to any young woman out there, there's some people whose dislike of you and disapproval of you that you should take as a compliment. Yeah.
Maybe since you talked about Cameroon, I actually come from that part of Cameroon where the crisis is going on right now, and I'll share my own Biafra story. Because when I grew up, Biafra was a space of shame, even in Cameroon. We are called Le Biafran. We are Biafrans. It's supposed to be a bad thing. It's supposed to make us inferior. We are those people. And I grew up wondering what that Biafra meant. So the novel you wrote was not just for you. Maybe I asked that question because it meant something to me. And I would tell you that I can't remember now, maybe 2009, Chinua Achebe organized a colloquium, Brown, and I heard that Ojukwu was going to be there. This is the guy who led Biafra. And I'm like, does he know that because of that, I'm stigmatized in Cameroon? So I am going to go to Brown, and I did. And I had this encounter with Ojukwu. He was a myth he was in my dreams, in my nightmares. This bearded man, he was supposed to be some bad figure. So even going to see him, I could be listed as bad. I'm going to meet this secessionist. But I did. And I went to him. He was now very mellow, not the rebel that I'd known him to be. He was now an older man. And I went to him and I said, "My name is Joyce, I'm from Cameroon. And I just want you to know that whatever you did in Nigeria did not end in Nigeria. I'm a second-class citizen in my country, and I'm called a Biafran because of all what you did over there." And he looked at me. It's amazing what time does, and he treated me like a 5-year-old, and I did not mind because I needed somebody to understand. And He touched my shoulder, and I can't remember what he said, but I felt closure, and I came back to Connecticut.
I love this story.
So that's my Biafra
Well, you
story.
know, it's also interesting how our destinies as Africans are interconnected.
So you would meet Cameroonians who will tell you that is, we get that all the time, le Biafran. That's in French, you know. So I think it's time for us to get questions. There's a couple from the audience. I'm hoping that I must have touched on some of your questions so that we will not have too many here.
Hi.
Hello? Oh, yes, it does work. When I was reading Half of a Yellow Sun, I was so struck by Kainene and Olana because I knew that time, and I go to church with a whole bunch of Igbo people, and they're pretty conservative, you know? And I was looking at these women, and I was thinking, like, the sexual revolution was just getting off the ground in you know, North America and Europe, and here are these women who've had lovers and live with them, and nobody is telling them to get married, and the priest is not like saying, you're a bad woman to Alana. I mean, I was just very struck by that, and I didn't know. I wanted to know if that was sort of a fantasy on your part, or you were just saying, these are women of privilege, and they can do whatever they want. So I was curious about those characters. And then finally, I just wanted to say in that book, the rope pots of Igbo Okwu, I kept reading about them, and I finally Googled, and I got a book from Yale's library, so I could see the pictures of those pots, and they are amazing and gorgeous, and just putting them in that book was a gift from Africa to the world, because those pots are in Nigeria. I will probably never make a trip there, but because of you, I looked them up, and I saw the beauty of your ancestral culture. And thank you.
Thank you. Actually, you can, and speaking of the perils of colonialism, you can in fact see those pots at the British Museum in London, and it's been at the Met as well. There you go. So much for African arts being in Africa. But it's very interesting. Your question, yes, it's because they're privileged, but I think that even in the novel we can see that they're different. And I think the way that Odeniwo's mother reacts to Olanna clearly shows us that Olanna is different. Right? It's really privileged. And so living a kind of life that just isn't the norm. And even the way that Olanna's family in Kano, her Auntie Feka, who adores her, but you can see that Auntie Feka thinks of them as kind of a separate species almost, but one that is almost aspirational, where Auntie Feka says to her, you know, go back and live the life that you're living in the university. But at the same time, and you know, I wouldn't use the US as the yardstick for being progressive in matters of anything, just saying, because at the time, there are many countries in Europe that are far ahead. America, speaking of sexuality, is extremely conservative, extremely conservative. My father told me stories of his life in the 1960s. Now, some things just surprised me because I had in my head this idea that they lived a really close conservative life, but actually that's not the case. And in reading memoirs of Nigerians at that period, educated Nigerians, obviously, privileged Nigerians, upper middle class Nigerians, there was a kind of, in a limited way, but a certain kind of freedom of making choices that they had that surprised me. So I tried to capture that in Half of a Yellow Sun. Actually, almost everything that happens in that book is based on a real story.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm sorry I haven't read any of your books yet. I'm only 10.
Oh.
I mean 11. Sorry, I'm 11. But I'm just wondering if you have any advice for an aspiring young author besides, of course, write about Barack Obama first.
First of all, thank you for your question. Thank you for your boldness in standing there. When I was 11, I don't know that I could have done what you've done, so it's really cool. I would say, so two things, read and write. And I know it sounds simple, but it's really not. I meet many young people who want to write, but they're not reading. You have to read a lot. So try, really do. You cannot be a good writer if you're not a good reader. And it's important to read widely, read different kinds of things, and read things so you know what you don't like, in addition to knowing what you like. I try to do 4 books a week. I would say try and do 5. And then write. And when you write, you're just 11, so but when you write, don't think about your parents, don't think about anybody you love, just think about the story that you're telling. Because if you think about your parents, you might not want to write certain things honestly. So just focus on what you're writing, and then hide it in a drawer in your room. What's your name?
Phineas.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Corona. I'm a senior at UConn. My classmates are over there. We're currently, we are from an anthropology seminar about flourishing and well-being and interdisciplinary perspectives. Flourishing and well-being and interdisciplinary perspectives, and we chose your book as like the main literature piece because we also read like anthropology articles and philosophy, but we chose your book as the literature piece.
Which one?
Oh, sorry, Americana. Yeah, okay. And in our discussions about how your book would relate to flourishing, like it talked about how like the different relationships that Ethan had and how she traveled, always maybe seeking freedom or maybe seeking truth, but it was kind of ambiguous. I mean, when I first started the book, I wasn't sure how the book could relate to flourishing because it was so complex and there's so much going on. So I guess my question is, what does flourishing mean to you? Yeah. Personally.
That's a lovely question. If only I could, if only I could answer it. I don't know. I think it means many things. But in terms of, Joyce was nodding enthusiastically when you said, so ambiguous. But I think that's what literature should be, right? That it shouldn't be about easy answers. I don't know. It's kind of, what does flourishing mean to me? I don't know, many things. Being at peace with oneself, sleeping well at night, and I mean that both literally and figuratively. Looking in the mirror and liking what you see, and I don't mean it physically. I mean liking yourself inside. One of my favorite lines from Michelle Obama is, "I like me." And I think it's revolutionary for women to say that, because we're not socialized to say that. So that for me is flourishing, having those moments of liking yourself. And it doesn't happen all the time, there are moments when you don't like yourself. Eating healthy food, getting over my laziness and exercising, eating chocolate, all those are flourishing. Reading books that move me, whatever they are, fiction, non-fiction, poetry, whatever.
Thank you.
I mean, I don't know about, it's another Nigerian. There may be, here's what I think though. I think that when members of groups that have been not necessarily excluded, but that haven't been represented, suddenly are represented, it can seem as though everywhere you turn they're there. But actually, I can think of maybe 4 Nigerian writers who are published in the US and sort of read widely, but not that many more. And 1 in every 5 Africans is Nigerian. So there's quite a number of us in the world. So just statistically speaking, it's not that surprising.
But I think I should say, in all honesty, from one African to another, is that in as much as you talk about the perils of carrying the Nigerian passport, I would tell you that Nigeria does put us positively on the map a lot for Africa. It does. It's wonderful to hear that, because the truth is not just in literature, in medicine, in every field. And I want to think that it's also because of the education. I think they had universities early, even the fact that Achebe was running the Heinemann series, so they have a tradition. There's a tradition. It's not coming out of a vacuum.
That's true. But also, I mean, in the same way that I think there's a lot one can explain about everything by just looking at the history. So Nigeria, and really I would say West Africa, Anglophone West Africa, because Francophone West Africa is messed up in a different way, because the French just did many terrible things. So the English did terrible things as well, but we survived. The history of Nigeria in particular is one in which, because we didn't have settlers, because British colonialism ended and the British left, and because traditionally the colonial Nigeria was not a time when Nigerians were not, they were not mine workers. So in the way that in Southern Africa, a lot of Africans worked in the mine, so they were wage earners. But in places like Nigeria, people were more entrepreneurial. And the British left, and so there's what people who come to Nigeria would call a kind of self-confidence. Other people would call arrogance. We Nigerians are happy to take either definition. But I think it feeds into a certain kind of cultural production. You know, there's a lot. Nigeria is a very vibrant place. It's a very troubled place, but it's also a very vibrant place where people push back. People are. You know, we wake up in the morning and we have a glass of self-confident arrogance for breakfast. And so it enables us to push back at the wall. And I think that's why in literature, in art, in fashion, in music, in medicine, Nigerians just, you know, we're taking over the world. That's what's happening.
So this is not a two-part question, but we wrote it together, so it's going to be read in two parts.
It's a performance.
So in your TED Talk on the dangers of a single story, you talked about the very limited narratives available on non-Western cultures, such as those in Asian and African countries, and how those can create misconceptions about those societies.
I like this.
Yeah.
So as students at a predominantly white school, what can we do to expand this narrative in our school communities and classrooms and ensure that students of color are represented both equally and accurately in the literature we read?
You're both in a predominantly white school. You know, there's something about it that's sad for me that this would even be your responsibility. I mean, that you're asking this question says something about something that the administration and the teachers are not doing. I'll tell you a story. So obviously, I can give you suggestions. I think it's important. First of all, I don't think it should be your responsibility, but since it seems to be, what you need to do is do the homework. You need to find the materials, then you need to present the materials to your teachers and the people who are responsible. But I also think that just more in a larger philosophical way, to make the argument that it's not really just about being nice. In other words, people shouldn't read. We should read about people who look like us, because there's a particular pleasure in that. But we should also read about people who do not look like us, because it prepares us to live in the world. You know, it's not about being nice or being politically correct. It's really just a pragmatic, reasonable thing. I remember talking to a woman once in a bookstore, and I said I was looking for children's books that had people that are characters that were not animals and were not white people, because all the books we had in my daughter's library at the time were mostly, you know, animals or white people. And this woman who was very nice, but she said to me, "Oh, I see why you would want that." And she was white. And I remember thinking, but so should you. You know, you should also want diverse books for your children. And so I think, and the reason I say this is that I think in framing the case for why that should be, it shouldn't be And I understand, you feel that you haven't been represented, but also it's good for people who don't look like you to read stories in which people like you exist. It's important. The world is diverse. We're not prepared to live in the world if we don't know the stories of people who are not like us. Can I tell another story about... Okay, so now this other story. This man who picked me up from the airport, actually here in the Northeast, and I won't say where, but it was in a college where I was getting an honorary degree. And in a state close to Connecticut, in a very prestigious, small, liberal arts college. Anyway, so this man picked me up from the airport. He was sort of the limo driver. He picks me up. He's very nice. He's a little over-familiar. But this happens to me when older white men pick me up, because I think they're taken aback by the person they've picked up, right? Because they don't expect me to be this sort of, black, youngish looking person. So he says to me, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a writer." And he said, "So what do you write?" And I said, "I write novels." He said, "Oh, okay, I don't read books." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "But even if I did read books, I wouldn't really know about books like yours." And I said, "Why do you say that?" And he said, "Well, I just wouldn't." And I knew what he meant. So I said, "You don't think I write about things that will interest you?" And he goes, "Yeah." And of course he meant black things and woman things, right? And it made me really think, because I would never, if you reversed it, it wouldn't work. I couldn't look at him, a white man, and say, "Oh, I wouldn't know about your books." Because I wouldn't look at him and assume what he wrote just by looking at him. And also, I read white men all the time. Some of my favorite writers are white men. It doesn't occur to me to look at a white man who's a writer and I'd be like, "I don't think I'll like your books." So I think, in just framing this need for diverse stories philosophically, it's to say, we need to place everybody's story on the shelf of the universal. We can't say that only one kind of story is universal while the others have to struggle, and young people have to come up and ask me, "How do we get out?" It's just not right. So you should go back and tell the people who run your school that they're not doing something right.
My English teacher is here right now. My English teacher is here right now.
All right, English teacher, we need to fix this.
We also read your book last year for AP English. It's actually kind of ironic we read this in English class, like Americana, but this is more of a general question. But.
Also last, I have to disclose I'm also Nigerian of Nigeria. So when I saw you coming, I was so excited. And you should know that all of your videos will be circulating in my family's WhatsApp forum by 9 o'clock latest. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And let me put a plug. If you are from West Hartford, the library is a very good place also. And I see that during their summer programs. So shout out to West Hartford Public Library.
Good evening. My name is Lorna, and it's quite a pleasure to be here before you. I have to say that I was not aware of the questions asked before me. I'm absorbing all of them, as I think all of us are. I'm so proud of our young people and the adults that are asking the questions they are. I am a mother of 2 daughters, a 3rd grader and a 6th grader. I'm here with my 6th grader. Don't want to embarrass her, but she is here, and she's an avid reader and a writer as well. My question is recognizing your candor, your character, and your confidence, which I also respect. What words of advice do you have for young people, but in particular young females of color, when they are trying to build within themselves the same abilities, the same characters that you have, recognizing that every environment they go into may not embrace them as the system that they are a part of?
Oof. Honestly, I wish I could fix the world's problems. I'm just like, I don't even know what the answer to that is. I think, I think it's hard for women to be, again, going back to what I talked about earlier, in the ways in which we become complicit in our own oppression, how, for a woman, you want to be confident, but you're constantly thinking, they're going to think I'm arrogant, so I better hold back a little, I better not. I think it's hard for women, all women. I think in this country, it's particularly hard for black women, because black women already come pre-burdened with assumptions of the angry black female, the unreasonable black female, that kind of thing. What I would say to young girls is, it's not that they shouldn't be aware of this, they should be, but try not to make it the thing that propels you. Because I think that sometimes it's possible to hold yourself back too much because you're thinking they're thinking this about me. And also to know you can't please everybody. You know, I've come to really embrace that, and there's something about it that's very freeing. And so for young women, what I would say is I believe very much in, there's a part of me that's also quite old-fashioned. I believe in sort of old-fashioned ideas of being respectful, being gracious, being kind, but standing your ground, you know, and not letting yourself be pushed around. And I think if you sort of approach life like that if people are nice to you, be nice to them, but do not ever be nice to somebody who means you harm. Just having that kind of attitude about life and not apologizing, you know, get in that door, occupy that space. Somebody might be annoyed, but that's their business. You know, it's knowing that you matter. I think we live in a society that constantly tells women that they don't matter as much, and we internalize it. And I think for young women, it's important to tell themselves every morning, I matter. And because I think what you carry in your head when you go out into the world shapes the way you engage with the world. And, you know, yes, there are many people who have negative ideas about black women, but also we have to remember that there are many people who know that black women are gorgeous and fantastic and brilliant. We have to remember that as well. It's not all negative. Sometimes I think, you know, when we talk about things like that, we forget there's also the plus side, right? Because black women are doing things in the world. And I generally like to say that if you're a young black woman, it helps from time to time to just pull up a picture of Michelle Obama and just soak in that gloriousness. Just for inspiration.
Thank you very much.
Hello, how's it going? I'm starstruck. Anyways, I was introduced to you a couple of months ago, actually. So I'm a convert, and thanks to my friend over there, actually. And so it was during one of your TED Talks, and one thing that really resonates with me that you said, and I'm sure it's been quoted a million times, is that culture doesn't make people; people make culture. And as an Egyptian, so proud of our continent being represented here. But as an Egyptian, every time I go back, I'm confronted with these really uncomfortable conversations and almost like every conversation I have that involves a woman, which is going to be 50%, right, is embedded with some type of sexism. And I think that as a male, it comes to me to at least try to change people's minds, or try to, you know, encourage people to look at women in a different way. So, but I don't want to come off preachy and condescending and rude. So based on your experience, what has been the most effective way of doing that? And what is your recommendation for, or any advice for men that come from the Middle East or the rest of Africa or other countries where women are?
Recommendation for men who come from Middle East Africa, men everywhere in the damn world, you guys need to step up and do this thing. Because I've always worried about, you know, when people sort of, when the demonstrations against rape, for example, it's 97% women, and I'm thinking, wait, where are the men? Right? Rape wouldn't happen if men didn't exist. Why are men not coming out to say we do not want this to happen? Anyway, what have I found? And I hear you about not sounding preachy, because it's very easy to lose people when you're having that conversation, especially because what you're doing is that you're going against this massive tide. What I find works is examples. I find that story works. I find that, so in making the case that people make culture, what I try to do now is to go back in the past and pull up examples and say, and especially things that you know they don't know. So you just sort of smack them with it on the face. You're like, well, do you know that in Egypt in 1872, women were blah, blah, blah? Because there are all of these interesting things from history. And then to say to them, well, do you know that it was culture in 1822 that women blah, blah, blah? And then suddenly they're like, well, so what you say to them is, well, that was culture 75 years ago. It means that we're remaking and making culture, so why can't we remake it? And I also use the argument that, what's the point of culture? Culture is for a group of people to thrive. So if we have cultural practices that are making it difficult for certain people to thrive, then it can't be good for all of us. Right? But what I also find works, particularly for Nigerian men, in making the case for feminism, is to tell them that, feminism also says that you don't always have to pay for everything. That generally works.
No. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. I have a question that sort of responds to what you said earlier about feminism and what it is for you. And you said that it's an unlearning. And I agree with that completely because I experienced that in my own life. Some of the best moments of my life are when I unlearn the roles and the responsibilities that I, grew up with. But I wonder if, or I should say yet, I wonder if, what you might think about, or what is your notion of feminism that is not quite as internal? So the idea that at some point we have to be both internal and thinking about building community. Thinking about we had this wave called Me Too, and how far have we gotten from it? And so I'm just wondering if you, in your novelist creative brilliance, if you had a thought about what for you is both an internal and external kind of feminist.
I think that's a wonderful question,
Yeah.
And I think about it, and I think, in some ways I think they're connected. In other words, it's my unlearning process, which is ongoing, that makes it possible for me to connect, I think, to other women and to the experiences of other women. And it's also why I think that our experiences as women are shaped by race, for example, by class. So there are differences there. But I also really feel that there is an underlying unity in the way that we're socialized across cultures. So I talk to women from different parts of the world, and instinctively we get, I'm telling them a story about my childhood, and suddenly they're telling their stories, and they're so similar, right? And it doesn't matter if the woman is from Denmark or from Korea, which is two places that I recently spoke to women at. But the Me Too movement, for example, for me is a source of hope. But I think it's very early days. But I think we also have to remember that any kind of justice movement takes time and is imperfect, right? And we've lived, how long have we been on earth? That's how long women have been second-class citizens. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take a very long time. So this for me is very baby steps that we're taking. But it gives me hope, because if there's anything revolutionary in it, it's that finally women's stories are being believed. And it's sad, but that's actually almost revolutionary, because for so long, women didn't talk about these things. And can you imagine how many women still are not talking about it? Because there's still so much negativity directed at women who talk. So I feel connected to the Me Too movement. I sort of felt compelled last year to talk about my own experience, because I felt like you cannot walk around the world saying we should all be feminists and not participate in this sort of burgeoning movement, right? So I talked about what had happened to me when I was younger in Nigeria, hoping that it would make other young Nigerian women feel that they can talk about it without shame. Because there's so much shame around something that somebody did to you that's not your fault, but you end up feeling shame. It's such a strange thing. So I feel connected to, but I also feel connected to other, there are things that, in South Korea, there's a movement of women that I find very interesting, that I follow, because young women are standing up and saying enough. Because there's this thing that's quite an epidemic in South Korea, where they have little cameras in public places and toilets where they record women and then they put them on porn sites. So for me, I was so inspired by this just grassroots uprising of young women across South Korea saying we've had enough. That I feel very connected to. And even in Nigeria, there's now young women are talking about something that's being called sex for grades, where university women are talking about the harassment by professors, people who, you'll fail your exam if you don't sleep with me kind of thing. And it's an epidemic, and they're talking about it. And so for me, I'm interested in the grassroots movements that sort of spring up and might not be terribly organized, but still speak to, I think, a kind of optimism, hope that that we'll get somewhere at some point.
Join those movements. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm a student at Hall, and we learn a lot about what our ancestors did, as we are in a predominantly white school. And it really hits us, or it hits me in particular, like learning about what my ancestors did and grappling with the privilege that I have. So I was just wondering, like, who am I to Black feminists? Like, how am I seen? And how is that different than what?
I think it's important when we talk about, and even hearing you say what my ancestors did. So you're not responsible for what your ancestors did. What you are responsible for is the privilege that it gave you. And I think they're two very different things. So what are you to Black? I mean, I don't know about Black feminists, but to me, you're a woman, and and I bet you that there are things we have in common. I bet you that your socialization has taught you about shrinking yourself and caregiving and all of those things that my own socialization also taught me. I believe that it's important to find ways in which we connect while acknowledging the ways in which we're different. I think it's really important to acknowledge difference, but to know that despite difference, because otherwise we can't have conversations and we can't move forward if we're constantly, I think there's a branch of academic feminism in this country today that makes it almost impossible for young people to be honest about what they're thinking and feeling and struggling with. Because you're worried about saying the wrong thing, because you're worried that somebody will turn on you because you didn't use the most woke expression. And I think I really think it's a disaster, because it's also, I think, something that's lacking in that movement is compassion. And I'm a person who approaches these things as a storyteller. So I'm thinking, the story here, what is the story here? So when you ask me, how are you seen? What's the story here? What's your story? Why is that the question? No, I mean that, I mean, I don't mean to be, I really do mean that in a genuine way.
I just feel like I'm not, like, it's just that fear that, like, I'm not enough, that, like...
Darling, welcome to the world, we all feel that.
I know, but it feels like despite, like, being given all this privilege, like what can I do with it? Like,
oh, there's a lot you can do, I'll tell you some things you can do. So in Americana, there's a bit about the white friend who gets it. You can be the white friend who gets it. So you go to white spaces and you start to dismantle racism. So you get that uncle of yours at Thanksgiving who's a bloody racist, and you tell him to stop being an asshole. And here's what else because this is the reason I said earlier that men also have to be part of the conversation. Sometimes men listen to men, and sometimes white people listen to white people. So, which is why white people need to be part of the dismantling racism. So there's a lot you can do with your privilege. As a white woman who gets it, you go in there and you just take an axe and you smash, not just patriarchy, but racism. That's what you do.
Vertically challenged, Mayor. I just want to thank you so much for being here. We all learned so much. I was blessed to have my son give me Americana 2 years ago for Hanukkah, actually, and that's how I fell in love with you and with your stories. But we have a storyteller who lived in West Hartford, was born in West Hartford. His name's Noah Webster. He actually was a Yale graduate. As well. And he was born in 1758, fought in the Revolutionary War, and went to Yale, and lived in New Haven for a long time. died in New Haven, actually. But this is a little history of the West Division of Hartford and West Hartford when he was here. So I want to give that to you, and then I'm also directing people to the yellow table over here for signed books. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
So don't go yet, don't go, but you can stand up. I'm going to end this in a very typically African way. There's no way two African women are on this stage and I don't do my thing. We love call and response. And you're going to say A, which means yes, you are agreeing. When I put my hand up, let me hear that. A, and we're going to ask you to continue writing because your writing does something to us. It educates us, it teaches us a lot. And we also want you to continue the nonfiction because we love the prescription. Many people came here and asked directly, you are a child in some respect, but you are also wise. You are an elder in some respect. So continue the nonfiction. We also want you to continue using your platform as a megaphone because you reach out to those who are oppressed. I've benefited from it as a Cameroonian. You know there's certain things I would not dare say, but you can say. My people are dying. Many are out in Nigeria as refugees. I want that megaphone to even be louder. And there are many homosexuals that want to hear that voice even more. Even in my country, Cameroon is still a crime. So we want that pen to continue. Let the editorials continue. And other ways that you can bring these ideas, these problems for the world to get. And we love your green shoes. We love the way you do the fashion. So writing books doesn't take the fashion away from you. So we want that to continue. And of course, we want you back in Connecticut. Thank you for coming.